Today we're going to be working on another viewer question, and if this sort of stuff sounds like it's interesting to you, leave a comment down below, subscribe, ring the bell, whatever. I'll be uploading a new video every Wednesday, so you can check back and see if your comment has been answered, or I might go back and actually try to poke the people who have had their comments answered, just so they know that I am responding to people and actually listening. But today's question is, what do I give my players so they will actually do stuff in the sandbox, but I don't want to leave them by the nose? And so there is an answer to this that I use, but I think understanding what the problem is to start with is going to be much better for contextualizing the answer that I'm going to give. And I think that the problem here is that there's a mismatch in expectations when it comes to playing a fantasy game or playing an action game, which something like D&D pretty much is. It's an action RPG. You're going out, you're fighting monsters, you're doing all these things. It is in fantasy, but the way that a lot of things get focused on, especially in D&D, is on the combat and the fighting goblins and that sort of stuff. And when you're looking at that, a lot of times you might be, as a player, trying to model yourself after something like an action hero, which is cool, right? You can often find people that suggest, if people are new, hey, think about something in a movie or a book or, a show that you've watched, an anime, anything that sounds cool to you and something you might want to play as or want to draw inspiration from, and then build that character. So you end up with a lot of characters that have either implicit or explicit hero origins that involve being an action hero. And the issue with this is that action heroes, as they are designed, most often, they are very reactive, right? They do things. Things are done unto them, and then they do other things. So a lot of times an action hero, if things don't kind of push the plot upon them, they don't go anywhere. And for a lot of people, when they think about a sandbox, and by people I'm talking about the DMs now, they're thinking about, I'm going to create all this cool stuff, or I'm going to create this world and set them loose in it, and they can just sort of like play with whatever they want. So the DM is going from the mindset of, okay, I've set up this world, I've designed this thing for them to do stuff in, and I need my players to proactively go into the world and do things. Make it their own. It's a sandbox. Have fun. The players are often coming to this from the perspective of thinking about things, either subconsciously or consciously, as an action hero, as a character from a story that tends to react to things, right? The idea of someone like John McClane, who's one of the standard action heroes, he doesn't have a goal that he's really trying to do. He tries to get away from having to deal with all these problems. He calls the police when there's an issue. He doesn't want to go in and save people. He just reacts to what the bad guys are doing. If the bad guys didn't take Nakatomi Plaza, he wouldn't be a hero. He wouldn't be doing any of these things. He wouldn't be the focus of our story. And that's true for a lot of Die Hard things. It's true for a lot of heroes in general, right? You start with any sort of superhero thing with the villain, right? Superman is often not seen as doing this grand thing and then the villain interrupts them. It's usually the other way around. The villain has this master plan and Superman interrupts them. Well, if you think about it, that's kind of reverse from how the DM is thinking about it. The player is thinking, I'm going to be here and I'm going to do these cool things and I'm going to react to stuff that's happening, and there's nothing happening. I don't have anything to react to. I don't have anything to latch onto. And the player might want a lot of choice about what type of thing they want to react to, but inherently they're syncing with the idea of reacting to things. And there are ways to get players to be more proactive, but I think the goal here is understanding that it is not either people's fault for this mismatch of expectations. It's not the player's fault for wanting to play the action hero. It's not the DM's fault for wanting the players to be proactive and do stuff in the world. But the way that it manifests a lot is that the players will say, hey, we have nothing to do. We have nowhere to go. We have this sort of paralysis of choices, of too many things to do. And the DM will say, my players aren't invested in the world. They don't want to do anything. I have to lead them by the nose. And then I feel like I'm not really digging into this sandbox idea. So it's a long explanation to get us to where I'm going to explain what I do as a solution. So if you want them to be more proactive, you can do things that kind of draw from fantasy. There are a lot of fantasy instances where the hero is proactive, but they are also seen in contrast to the villain. If you have something like the idea of this grand thing that the creature or person or player or whatever is trying to do, they might have that a little bit more clear in fantasy novels and fantasy stuff. Like they're trying to come into their own. They want to change the world. They want to do all these things. And the way that they are pulling forward, oftentimes it's introducing new things into the world, but they have a goal in mind. And for the bridge to put between the player's expectations and the DM's expectations, what I like to use is something modeled off of the game Fiasco. Now, Fiasco is a great game. It does not take very long to learn. You could sit down and run it after playing maybe 30 minutes-ish with the rules. A lot of that being just reading and rereading things and then going, okay, what playset do we want to play with? And I'll link in the description down below a list of all of the playsets for fantasy, and you can draw inspiration from those. But one of the things that is useful here is by putting those expectations together, right? You want to give the players a world to play around with, but you don't want to force them to do anything in the particular world. You can get the players to buy into whatever that thing is, right? If you have an idea of, let's take a very well-known example, Lord of the Rings. If your idea is, hey, we're going to fight against the Dark Lord, that's what I want to do, you can make it very linear, and you do that by starting the person with the ring and say, you're going to die if you don't get rid of this. And that puts them in the reactive position, right? They have to react to the fact that they have this dark item and the Dark Lord is coming to take over the world and they need to do something about it. That puts them in the position of the action hero. But people might say that doesn't feel very sandboxy to me. That feels like you're railroading them to deal with this problem or the world ends. What you can do instead of doing it that way is you can talk to the player and see what they want to do. And the Fiasco game is really good about this because you take these pieces of how these things fit together and the DM or the other players pick one and then the PCs can pick one for themselves. So in the handbook, it talks about 4 different types. We're going to focus on the first 2, the relationships and the needs. So the relationships and the needs, I use these a lot for putting the pieces together to give the players initial quest hooks, initial investments, but let them build pieces of it and then be able to slot it into your world. You might have a player that comes to you and is like, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do, but I don't know what your world is like. And you might be the type of person that says, hey, great, you want to know what my world is like? Here's a 700-page document. Please read it, and there'll be a test at the end. That doesn't really help anyone for getting going. It doesn't help the investment unless you have a player that just really wants to be invested, in which case you don't need to do that much to get them invested. You don't need to build the bridge if they're building it to you. So in this instance, the things that you're going to do is focus on one of these relationships or one of these needs and define half of it and get the player to do the other thing. And when you're building these things, what I like to do is have 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the party, right? Why are these people doing something in the world in the sandbox? And then why are they sticking together as a group? And a lot of times, people focus on that idea of the group being something that the entire group has to be part of, right? This is you're part of a guild of people that work together. You're part of the Thieves Guild or the Adventuring Guild, or you're all this one thing, and that can feel pretty stifling to me. What they do in Fiasco is you have links between individuals around the table, and each of those links can be something like a relationship or a need or a desire or even a location or item or something like that. And they're individual, right? You're linking 2 people together, but you create this chain, right? This person is linked to this person who's linked to this person. Now, person 1 and person 3 might not have any obvious links, but that's okay. They don't need them because both of their links to person 2 is going to keep them cohesive, or at least help keep things cohesive. Because at the end of the day, the players want to stay together because they want to play D&D. They want to play the cool game together, even if it doesn't make 100% sense. They want to play the game, and if you give them a way to do it, they're going to say, hell yeah, let's jump in. So let's do a specific example here, and we'll talk about building a relationship. Now, like I said, relationships work really well for inside the party, building the character in a way that makes them connected to the other party members, and then needs help you connect to the outside world, usually by connecting with an NPC rather than a PC. So, for example, if we build a relationship and we say, all right, here's the category, the DM is going to say, all right, I've got a category here, and the category is, let's say that you're veterans from a war, right? I'm going to use this to connect the player to the outside world. And with this, I can then explain the world. Okay, you guys were veterans. If this sounds fun to you, I'll explain kind of the previous war, a little bit what was happening. And what is your all's interaction with this war? How did you define this relationship? And you can have something like, you were veterans in the war, and the players might say, we like that or we don't like that. And if they don't like that, you can come up with something else. One of the great advantages of having these playbooks, and there being so many of them online for free, is that you can load up 5 or 6 of them and just kind of flip through and see what really attaches to your player, what the players say, yeah, that's what I want to do. And if they find something they really like, then you can define it further. So you say, all right, the PCs are agreed. We want, being veterans from this war sounds kind of cool. And then you talk to the players and say, all right, well, what is your character's interaction with this war? What is your defining feature of this relationship? The overall relationship between these two PCs is they were veterans in the war. So how did that go? Are you battle scarred and you want to try to avoid combat in all ways? That might be really weird or interesting for a D&D game. Are you going to overcome that at some point? Or is it going to be a constant thing where people are going to have to pull you along to get you to engage in combat? Is this going to be something like the idea of the Soldier of Fortune from something like Black Hawk Down, where the character says, you know, I'm going to do this forever. I'm going to be a fighter forever because I don't fit in with civilian life. I don't function as a non-fighter, and now that there's no war to find, I have to find something else to do. That might be why these two people became adventurers. And what you'll find is, very quickly, if one half of that thing is something that the DM has said, all right, here's the overarching thing, here's some lore stuff, here's some connections to the world, here's a sergeant that you knew, here's the way that it fell out, maybe it was against the elves, and the elves that are in the area are going to be something that you inherently dislike, or maybe you inherently feel for them because of how things went. You can kind of play that up, and it gives you something to work with so the players can develop an interest in the world, can develop something to go do. You're giving them something to react to, but unlike the idea of it being forced on them like the action hero, right, where here is the ring, if you do not do this, you will all die, it's more like, okay, here's a thing that exists in my world. Now, if this is fun to interact with, how you interact with it and how you build off of this can then define your character, and it's going to let you have an avenue to be able to find things to do. I always tell my players, when you're making your character, when you're interacting with the world, I want you to find hills to die on. I want you to find stuff that either you care about personally or you can find an interesting way to interact with, because the more interests you have, the more relationship, the more ties that you have, the more easy it is to get invested in what's going on and to be able to figure out how you're going to interact with this world. I'll give one more quick example and then we'll move along. If you had something like the player say, hey, you know, what we really want for these characters is we just want money. We want to have fame, fortune, women, the whole 9 yards. That's what we want. So the players can say our overarching thing is we have a need, and our need is currency. We just want to be rich. And then you can say, okay, well, let's define that. Let's connect it with certain things in the area and see what would be fun. Maybe you could say, all right, well, players, you want to get rich, but what would it be? Would it be fun because you need to pay off a debt first, right? You're starting behind. You can get rich, but there's a debt because you need the town had to pull together to raise dead this person, and because they all pulled together their money, their resources, it was a big drain on the town, and now the whole town is impoverished, and you need to get that done first. And then, you know, get money afterwards, right? You were raised very poor, and now the idea of fame and fortune is powerful. And the PCs might say, yeah, that's great, or they might not. And then the DM can kind of go through, can look through a list, can look for fortune or for fame or riches or whatever as one of the needs that is in these different playbooks. And they can just cycle through and say, well, you don't like that option, let's go with this option or this option or this option. The idea is that it's setting up this conversation, right? It's giving inherently the DM something that fits in with their world or their NPC, right? Our guy that got resurrected is going to feel indebted to them and is going to be someone that they can interact with, right? They're going to have a built-in relationship with this NPC because he knows that some of the money from here is for his resurrection. And you could decide, hey, we're going to make that one of the players. You could. It doesn't really fit the same thing for the being able to link them in with the world, right? You can make that a PC to PC interaction, or you can make that an interaction for the group or an individual need. But for the moment, let's assume that it is an NPC that has been resurrected and that we have this need for fortune. And that gives you something with the outside world. You could have a need that says, hey, I want fortune because my family was super wealthy and they've been displaced. They've lost their fortune, and maybe I grew up until I was, a teen, and as a teenager my family lost the fortune, and suddenly I don't know how to deal with all this crap. I can't eat whatever I want. I can't go with whatever I want. I have to work for what I'm doing. Like, this is bullshit. And if you have that, if you remember from our discussion about NPCs, there was the displaced noble, right? The bandit lord in the camps that had a connection to something. You could say, all right, well, that is your uncle, and you were both wealthy, and then this thing happened, and all of a sudden the players have a reason to go do stuff. They haven't had you start in your house and then the peasants revolt and tear your thing down, and you're now lost as the last Romanov. You don't have to have that, right? You're not forcing it on the players as you must react to this right now, but you are giving them the pieces of dramatic tension and the connections with the world that they can then build their own stuff off of. Now, all of these things need to be things that they could decide they just want to ignore. That's part and parcel to being a sandbox, is that the players should have things that they go, yeah, I can see why my character would do this, but also I don't wanna. I wanna do something else. I found something else that's interesting. I found something else that's more enticing to me. And if the group as a unit has connections with each other, and so if the player has one foot inside of the party, moving them around the world, when the other people have things that draw them off in different areas, then they'll be able to go with them. They'll have a reason in character and out of character. In character because of whatever our relationship together. We were serving together in the war, and you're now going home to deal with the money issue from one of the people that had died while you were away. And you have that as an in-game reason, and an out-of-game reason, you just want to play D&D with your friends, right? You want to get together and roll some dice and play some fun games, and being able to take those two expectations of what I want to do in the world and what I want to do out of the world and put them together is really useful. And by that same token, putting together the expectations of the DM saying, I've created all this stuff, I want my players to interact with it, and then the player saying, I don't want to be forced to interact with any one particular thing, but I do want to play the game. If you can put those two things together, then you can have something that is a much more rewarding Dungeons & Dragons experience. And I think that the answer to the question of how do I get my people to do stuff in the sandbox without leading them by the nose is weirdly just communication, right? It's what we've just been talking about. It's creating these relationships. It's setting these things up, usually prior to the game beginning. This would be something I would do in session 0 with the players and say, hey, how do you guys want to connect to each other, right? We need to have some sort of connection in the world to connect you guys together. And the last thing that I will say is, if it comes half from the DM and half from the player, right? 1 foot in the group and 1 foot in the world, then you're going to have people that find it easy to stick together, easy to be a cohesive unit, easy to be people that maybe not are all on the same page, but at least have a reason to continue to work together. And they'll have a reason to make choices about what they're going to do in the world. And the last little side effect of this is, if you do a good job and you make the compelling arguments for each of these different things to happen, right? You've got the 1 foot out of the party is in the world. If those are 5 different things and you've got 5 different players, you're going to start the game with 5 different things they want to do in your world. And each of them will be connected to something you've already built. So you don't have to build new crap for all of this. You've connected it to one of these other pieces you've got down the line. One of these NPCs that we've talked about that has a motivation and has drive and desires and means to act on it. And when you put the players in contact with them, you give them a reason to go talk to them. Not only are you making your world feel more real, not only are you getting the investment that you're wanting from your players, but at the end of the day, you're saving a ton of work for yourself, because you're pretty sure plopping them on this map and saying, start, you don't have to prepare every direction of where they could possibly go. You've already worked it out. You need to prepare these 5 things. You might add to that if you really feel like it, but those are the 5 you need, because that's what you've set this contract with your player up and said, these are the 5 things that you've made with me to connect yourselves to the world. So let's actually use those connections. Let's start there and see what comes of it. Let's see what you want to build off of it. I hope that was helpful. And again, if you like this stuff, I will see you guys next Wednesday.